They told Shedeur Sanders he wasn't ready. They said the NFL game was too fast for him, that he relied too much on talent, that he played off script, that he needed to mature. And quietly, behind closed doors, some of the same voices were saying something even worse, that he was never supposed to be this guy in the first place. Because let's be honest, when Shedeur slipped to the 5th round, most people thought the story was already written. Late pick, famous last name, too much hype, not enough intangibles. The kind of quarterback you talk about for a year or two, then forget once the real stars take over. That was the narrative, that was the expectation, that was the plan. But then something strange started happening. Every time Shedeur actually got on the field, the story didn't match the script. The throws were cleaner. The reads were faster. The pocket presence looked nothing like what the critics described. And instead of shrinking under pressure, he started doing the one thing the media never accounted for producing. Not in garbage time, not in meaningless games, in real moments, against real defenses, with real consequences. And suddenly, the same people who said he wasn't ready started changing the conversation. Not by admitting they were wrong, but by moving the goalposts. Now it wasn't about talent anymore. Now it was about fit. Now it was about maturity. Now it was about long-term future. And that's when the whispers started. That maybe Shedeur's future wasn't in Cleveland. That the Browns were just a stop. That he was a placeholder. That eventually, the league would figure him out. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Every time the league figures him out, he levels up. Every time they doubt him, he responds with numbers. Every time they question his ceiling, he raises it. And now the NFL is in a very uncomfortable position. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay locked in on all the latest NFL drama, make sure you hit that like button. It helps the video reach more people who love this content just like you. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another update, reaction, or storyline as it unfolds in real time. I also want to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about Shedeur Sanders' performance and the Browns' collapse? Drop your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And don't forget to share this video with friends who follow the NFL. Your support truly keeps the channel moving forward. Because Shedeur Sanders isn't supposed to be here this fast. He's not supposed to be outplaying expectations. He's not supposed to be making veterans nervous. He's not supposed to be forcing front offices to rethink their plans. Yet here we are. A quarterback drafted late, with no guaranteed future, no media protection, no institutional backing. And somehow, he's becoming one of the most talked about young players in the entire league. Not because of his last name, not because of headlines, but because every time he steps on the field, the results keep exposing the people who said he couldn't do it. And now the real question is whether Shedeur can survive in the NFL anymore. The real question is something much more dangerous for the league. What if Shedeur Sanders isn't just good? What if he's about to completely rewrite who was supposed to win from the very beginning? From the moment Shedeur Sanders entered the draft conversation, the narrative around him felt different, not louder, not harsher, just strangely specific in the worst way. While other quarterbacks were being dissected through mechanics, arm angles, and offensive systems, Shedeur kept getting hit with something more abstract. Maturity, discipline, playing within the scheme, hero ball tendencies. None of it sounded like real football analysis. It sounded like branding. The loudest voice pushing that narrative was Todd McShay, one of the most powerful evaluators in sports media. And what made it so dangerous wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. No clear clips, no broken down drives, no specific moments where Shedeur failed to execute an NFL concept, just repeated phrases that felt meaningful without actually proving anything. And the craziest part, those same phrases had already been used on him the year before. During the original draft cycle, McShay and others claimed teams were concerned about Shedeur's interviews, that he didn't come across well, that some coaches felt he was too confident. None of those claims were ever backed up. No leaked transcripts, no confirmed sources, no named scouts, just anonymous whispers that somehow carried enough weight to push a projected first-round talent all the way into the fifth. And that's when people started noticing the pattern. Every time Shedeur performed well, the criticism didn't disappear, it shifted. When he put up numbers, the focus moved to leadership. When he showed leadership, it moved to system fit. When he mastered the system, it moved to personality. It was like chasing smoke. The target kept moving, but the conclusion never changed. He wasn't ready. He was the guy. He was built for this level. And then came the comparisons. While Caleb Williams was being praised as a generational talent, creative, instinctive, fearless, Shedeur was being criticized for those exact same traits. When Caleb improvised, it was called elite playmaking. When Shedeur did it, it was called reckless. When Caleb extended plays, it was natural feel for the game. When Shedeur did it, it was drifting in the pocket. Same behavior, completely different labels. And that's where the narrative started feeling less like evaluation and more like positioning. Because if you listened closely, none of the critiques were actually disprovable. Maturity can't be measured. Leadership is subjective. Scheme fit depends on who's running the scheme. These are the kind of terms that sound analytical but function as shields. They let you criticize without ever being held accountable. If Shedeur failed, the narrative was right. If he succeeded, the narrative just evolved. And that's what made this moment different. For the first time, people weren't just hearing the narrative. They were comparing it to the film, to the stats, to the actual games. And the gap between what was being said and what was actually happening on the field was getting impossible to ignore. The narrative had been floating around for months, almost untouched, repeated so often that most people didn't even question it anymore. But everything changed the moment G. Bush decided to say what a lot of fans were already thinking, out loud, on a live stream, with thousands of people watching in real time. This wasn't some scripted debate. This wasn't a polished TV segment. This was raw, unfiltered. And that's exactly why it hit so hard. G. Bush was reacting to comments from Todd McShay, who once again claimed that Shedeur Sanders needed to mature, drifted in the pocket, and probably didn't have a real future in Cleveland. Same language, same energy, same conclusions, different year. And G. Bush immediately saw the problem. Not that McShay had an opinion, everyone does, but that he was making definitive claims with zero evidence. No clips, no breakdown, no explanation of what maturity even meant in football terms, just recycled phrases being passed off as expert analysis. So G. Bush did what almost nobody in sports media ever does. He stopped the conversation and asked the one question that destroys every lazy take. Based on what? Not hypothetically, not emotionally, literally. What plays? What drives? What moments? And suddenly, the narrative had nowhere to hide. Because when you strip away the buzzwords, there was nothing left underneath them. G. Bush pointed out that McShay was referencing college-era tendencies from over a year ago, while completely ignoring what Shedeur had just done in actual NFL games. He wasn't reacting to current film. He was reacting to an old version of a player who didn't even exist anymore. That's when G. Bush went nuclear. He called out the timing. Shedeur had just come off one of the best performances by a rookie quarterback all season. Over 360 passing yards, Pro Bowl appearance, real production against real defenses. And this is when McShay chose to revive the old talking points. G. Bush said it felt intentional. Not in a conspiracy way, but in a narrative way. Like someone trying to reset the conversation before it fully flipped. Because once the league accepts that Shedeur is actually developing fast, the entire draft storyline collapses. And that's uncomfortable for the people who built their reputations on being right. But the most brutal part of G. Bush's rant wasn't even the stats. It was the accusation that cut straight through the industry. He said these guys don't do the work anymore. They don't watch full games. They don't talk to position coaches. They don't track player development. They just turn on a microphone and repeat whatever narrative worked last time. And in Shedeur's case, that narrative was already baked in. Late pick, famous dad, needs to mature. G. Bush wasn't just defending a quarterback. He was calling out an entire system that pretends to analyze players while quietly protecting its own past takes. Because admitting Shedeur is real now would mean admitting they missed badly. And once that idea landed with the audience, the conversation stopped being about Shedeur Sanders altogether. It became about who actually controls the truth in sports media anymore, and whether anyone was still doing the work to deserve that power. Once the noise settled and the hot takes started colliding with reality, the conversation shifted to the only people whose opinions actually matter, the ones in the building, in the meeting rooms, and on the practice field every single day. The coaches, not the analysts, not the personalities, the people whose jobs depend on getting this right. And that's where the entire narrative around Shedeur Sanders began to quietly fall apart. Because while the media kept talking about maturity and bad habits, the people responsible for developing him were saying the exact opposite. The Browns' quarterback coach, Bill Musgrave, didn't use vague language. He didn't dance around his words. He described specific traits: work ethic, footwork, progressions, rhythm, the boring stuff, the real stuff. According to Musgrave, Shedeur wasn't coasting on talent. He wasn't freelancing. He wasn't ignoring structure. He was doing the one thing that separates real quarterbacks from temporary ones: obsessing over details, studying film, cleaning up mechanics, learning how to move defenders with his eyes, understanding where the weak spots are in coverage and how to get to them quickly. That's not immature. That's professional development. And it didn't stop with Musgrave. Even Kevin Stefanski, who usually keeps his comments generic, started leaning into the same message. He talked about Shedeur's preparation, his communication in the huddle, his ability to process information under pressure. Not in a hype way, in a "this guy actually understands what we're asking him to do" way. Which created a massive contradiction. Because if the coaches are praising his processing, his discipline, and his work habits, then what exactly is the media talking about when they say he needs to mature? No one could answer that. And that's when it became clear that two completely different versions of Shedeur Sanders were being discussed. The media version, frozen in time, built from old college clips and draft rumors, and the real version, evolving every week inside an NFL system. G. Bush pointed this out in the simplest way possible. He said, if the guy who spends 8 hours a day with him in film sessions says he's improving, who do you trust more? The coach who's responsible for his growth, or the analyst who hasn't watched a full Browns game all season? That question alone destroyed the entire foundation of the narrative. Because development isn't a theory, it's visible. It shows up in footwork, in timing, in decision-making, in how quickly a quarterback moves through progressions instead of locking onto one target. And those were the exact areas Musgrave highlighted. Not arm strength. Not hype. Not personality. Actual quarterback traits. And here's the part that really exposed the disconnect. After Shedeur's breakout game, a lot of the credit went to the system, to the coaching staff, to the scheme, as if Shedeur was just a passenger being carried by infrastructure. But Musgrave shut that down immediately. He said the improvements were happening because Shedeur was putting in the work, because he was determined to get it right, because he was grinding on the details most people never see. Which flips the entire story on its head. If Shedeur is improving because of his habits, if his mechanics are sharpening, if his processing is accelerating, then the scary truth for the league is simple. They didn't draft a finished product. They drafted a quarterback who's still leveling up. One of the most repeated criticisms about Shedeur Sanders has been that he drifts in the pocket. It sounds technical. It sounds like real football analysis. And because it's vague enough, it's hard to challenge unless you actually watch the games. But that's exactly where the entire argument falls apart. Because when people in the media say drifting, what they're really doing is referencing old college tape, moments from Colorado where the offensive line collapsed and Shedeur was forced to create something out of nothing. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. Bad protection. Broken plays, no clean pockets, so he adapted. He extended. He survived. And somehow, that survival skill turned into a flaw. Fast forward to the NFL and the picture looks completely different. The pockets are cleaner. The routes are sharper. The reads are structured. And suddenly, the same quarterback who was accused of being chaotic looks controlled. The perfect example was the 60-yard touchdown to Jerry Jeudy. On the surface, it looked like a simple deep ball. But when you break it down, it exposed how lazy the drifting narrative really is. Shedeur takes the snap, reads the front side, sees it's covered, resets his feet, moves through his second progression, and then launches to the backside receiver for a strike. That's not drifting. That's processing. That's the exact thing quarterbacks are taught to do: read coverage, manipulate the pocket just enough to create a throwing lane, and deliver the ball where the defense is. No panic, no freelancing, just clean movement and decision-making. Even Bill Musgrave highlighted this. He talked about how Shedeur's footwork had improved, how his rhythm was cleaner, how he was learning to let the pocket work for him instead of escaping it too early. Those are coaching phrases, real ones, the kind you don't say unless you're seeing it on film. But the media never updated the storyline. They kept describing a version of Shedeur that doesn't exist anymore. And G. Bush called that out directly. He said McShay was analyzing a quarterback from 2023 while ignoring the quarterback from last Sunday, talking about tendencies from college while skipping over actual NFL tape where Shedeur was standing tall, delivering throws under pressure, and leading the offense down the field. That's not analysis. That's memory. And memory is dangerous in sports because players change fast, especially young quarterbacks, especially ones who actually put in the work. The NFL is built on adaptation. Either you evolve or you disappear. And Shedeur has clearly chosen the first option. The drifting label survives because it's easy to repeat and hard to disprove if nobody rewatches the film. But once you do, the narrative flips instantly. You don't see a quarterback fleeing the pocket. You see one manipulating it. You don't see panic. You see patience. You don't see chaos. You see structure. And the scary part for the critics is this. Pocket presence is one of the hardest traits to teach. Arm strength can be improved. Mechanics can be refined. But feel, timing, spatial awareness, that usually comes from instinct. Which means if Shedeur Sanders already has that, and he's still improving, the pocket problem might end up being the thing that proves everyone was watching the wrong tape all along. There's one game the media almost never brings up when talking about Shedeur Sanders. One matchup that completely disrupts the entire hierarchy they spent years building. Because if you actually revisit it, a lot of comfortable narratives suddenly become very hard to defend. The 2023 showdown between Colorado and USC Trojans. On one side, you had Caleb Williams, the projected #1 pick, the generational talent, the face of college football, surrounded by elite recruits, future pros at every position, and an offense designed to showcase his creativity. On the other side, you had Shedeur Sanders, playing behind a shaky offensive line, missing key weapons, and leading a program that had just been rebuilt from scratch. Same field, same night, same stakes. And the results were not what the narrative prepared people for. Shedeur finished the game with over 422 total yards of offense and 5 touchdowns. He was moving the ball at will, attacking coverage, extending drives, and keeping Colorado competitive against one of the most stacked rosters in the country. Caleb had his moments too. The highlights were there, the touchdowns were there. But when you look at total production, Shedeur actually generated more offense, more combined yardage, more responsibility, less help. And that's the part that makes this game so uncomfortable for analysts. Because if Shedeur is really the quarterback who lacks arm talent, lacks mobility, and relies too much on improvisation, how did he outproduce the supposed generational prospect in a direct head-to-head? That's not a hypothetical. That's not a projection. That's on tape. And yet, this game is almost never referenced in draft conversations. It gets treated like an anomaly, a fluke, something to quietly skip over so the hierarchy stays intact. But G. Bush didn't let it disappear. When McShay claimed Shedeur had the same bad tendencies as Caleb, but without the physical tools to survive, G. Bush pulled this game up immediately. He said, "You can't say that and ignore the one time they actually played each other." Because this wasn't a drill. It wasn't practice. It wasn't a highlight reel. It was real competition. And Shedeur didn't just survive it, he thrived in it. Even more telling was the context. USC's defense was loaded with 4- and 5-star recruits. Colorado's offense was still learning each other's names. Travis Hunter was limited. Protection was inconsistent. And yet, Shedeur still managed to move the ball, take hits, and keep producing under pressure. That's not system success. That's quarterback success. And once you acknowledge that, the entire comparison starts to feel upside down. Because the question stops being, why isn't Shedeur viewed like Caleb? And starts becoming something much more dangerous for the draft industry. What if the only reason Caleb was crowned is because everyone decided the story before the games were finished being played? And what if Shedeur Sanders already proved on the field that the gap between them was never as big as they told us it was? At a certain point, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders stopped being about football. Not in an obvious way, not with anything anyone could quote directly, but in the subtle way narratives start shifting when people don't know how to say what they really mean. That's where the coded language comes in. Maturity, leadership, decision-making. Can he run an NFL offense? Is he really ready for the responsibility? On paper, those sound like normal quarterback questions, but in practice, they've been applied very selectively, and historically, they've followed a very specific pattern. G. Bush said it out loud when most people only hinted at it. The narrative that black quarterbacks aren't cerebral enough, aren't natural leaders, or don't understand the system didn't start with Shedeur. It's been recycled for decades, just dressed up in new language every generation. Doug Williams was told he couldn't read defenses. Warren Moon was told he wasn't built for the NFL. Because at that point, Shedeur Sanders isn't just a quarterback on the roster anymore. He's the heartbeat of the team. At this point, the debate around Shedeur Sanders has drifted so far from reality that it almost feels symbolic of something bigger than football. It's no longer about whether he can play. That question has already been answered on the field, with real defenses, real pressure, real expectations. The real question now is why the narrative still lags so far behind the evidence. Because everything the system claimed Shedeur lacked, processing, discipline, leadership, composure, has quietly become the very reason he's succeeding. The late draft pick label doesn't fit anymore. The developmental project framing doesn't hold up. The placeholder story has collapsed under its own weight. What we're watching now is something the NFL struggles with every few years. A player who doesn't fit the original script. Shedeur wasn't supposed to rise this fast. He wasn't supposed to outperform projections. He wasn't supposed to make veterans uncomfortable. He wasn't supposed to turn into a legitimate franchise conversation before the league had time to adjust its expectations. But that's exactly what's happening. And the uncomfortable truth for the media is this: once fans have access to film, stats, and direct coach quotes, narratives lose their power. Gatekeeping stops working. Authority starts shifting. Analysts can no longer control perception when the audience can verify everything in real time. That's why moments like G. Bush's takedown hit so hard. Not because he defended Shedeur, but because he exposed how outdated the entire evaluation system has become. Too many voices still speak from memory instead of evidence, from reputation instead of research. And Shedeur is the perfect example of why that's dangerous. Because if the league had followed the narrative instead of the tape, he would still be buried on a depth chart somewhere, invisible, ignored, written off. Instead, he's becoming one of the most polarizing young quarterbacks in the NFL, not because he's failing, but because he's succeeding in a way the system didn't predict. So what is Shedeur Sanders' real future? It's not defined by draft position. It's not defined by analysts. It's not defined by legacy narratives. It's defined by something far more simple and far more powerful. Production. Growth. Trust. If he keeps developing, Cleveland won't be asking whether to keep him. They'll be asking how to build around him. And the rest of the league won't be questioning if he belongs. They'll be questioning how they let him fall in the first place. That's the part nobody wants to admit. The system didn't discover Shedeur Sanders. It underestimated him. And now it's being forced to catch up in real time.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.